Hello, everyone, and welcome to BSidesCLT. This is my talk, Weapon of Mass Destruction, a look at ransomware epidemic. I'm Fernando Tomlinson. All right, so a little bit about myself. I've been with the Department of Defense for about 19 years. I'm a cybersecurity adjunct professor, also a technology consultant with Reliable Cyber Solutions, and I'm a PowerShell enthusiast. There's a number of sites in which I have a presence on, so if you're looking to connect, you can find me there. All right, here's our agenda today. And then as we begin this and really get started, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the different malware types. So as we talk about viruses, right, nothing more than a piece of code that's capable of copying itself, or worms, you know, items that replicate itself in order to spread across other machines. You know, we have things like keyloggers, right, that essentially track and record a person's keystroke. And then we kind of get to the point where we have ransomware. And it itself is designed to deny access to a system or data until a ransom is paid. Now, that's a very quick and upfront definition of it. But really, let's look at what other people in our field seem to say about it. And as we look at these people, all reputable entities in our field, they all pretty much say the same. Although their words are slightly different, the summary of it all is that it is all the same. And they all have had their fair share dealing with ransomware as a service in which they provide to people to remediate. So targets. Who are the targets of this ransomware? Well, typically it's home users and businesses. Why is it home users? Well, because they typically don't have any backups, right? They have little to no cybersecurity education. They typically don't keep their software up to date. They don't have the need or fail to invest in cybersecurity solutions that would prevent such things from happening. And then businesses, right? That's where all the money is. So if I'm an attacker, that's where I'm going to get the biggest payoff. So it would make sense that businesses would be here. Smaller businesses are often unprepared to deal with advanced cyber attacks, right? Systems and companies are often complex and prone to vulnerabilities that can be exploited. And really, it becomes businesses having a lot more to lose, as one would say. And this is why people tend to target them. So why is this ransomware thing even a thing? Well, authors instill fear and panic into their victims. This causes people to do things they typically wouldn't do. Well, you're holding my data for ransom and I can no longer access it. I want this fill-in to cease, so I'm willing to pay a ransom, or I'm willing to do whatever it is that you want me to do. Intimidating messages could also instill fear in people. Hey, your computer has been visiting illegal content, and to unlock it, you must pay a $100 fine. Right? Wrong, right, and different. People don't want to find themselves in such a position where they're faced with things like that. And it's also lucrative. When we look at stuff like cyber extortion, that's mainly why ransomware is a thing. And the impact of it all, well, there's temporary permanent loss of sensitive proprietary information, disruption to regular operations. Nobody wants that, especially if I'm an organization where our main revenue is based on a service or good that we provide. Any disruption to that could have fatal consequences to the organization. Could also harm the organization's reputation. Nobody wants to lose stock or investments or anything having to do with the organization. So again, the impacts are rather huge and large in this aspect. The common vectors, well, typically spear phishing, vulnerability exploitation, what is publicly facing that can be exploited to gain a foothold in the organization to then privilege escalate ourselves later on. Maybe some poorly secured services that, you know, have some remote execution or some other bounds check that isn't fully done. And then there's a number of other infections. But when we look at the breakdown of the top three, phishing, software vulnerability, RDP compromise, we see RDP overwhelmingly leads to front here. Anything that's really publicly facing and accessible that people can just continuously try to tag at until they gain access becomes a vector. And really, when we look at ransomware, there's two types. We have lockers, right? They essentially deny access to a specific machine. They're more easily removed because they're essentially putting a window in front of the rest of our data, preventing us from accessing it. We have cryptos. Those are the things that are actually encrypting the files and stuff on our machine. They require some reversing of the process to be able to get it back. Now, where crypto really wins out is with people who don't utilize backups in an offline manner, right? Because now people find themselves in such a place where they are more prone to pay the fee because they have no other way to get that data back. Now, with all that being said, we'll take a trip back down memory lane, right? Because we all recognize ransomware is a thing, but let's take a little history lesson to really understand where it came from. Well, back in 1989, Dr. Joseph Pop had the AIDS ransomware. And essentially, he had 20,000 copies distributed on a floppy disk, right? Labeled AIDS information introductory diskettes. It had surveys on it, but it also replaced the autoexec.bat, right? And essentially, the autoexec.bat in earlier Windows machines contained instructions of what to execute when an operating system was booting up. And it would lay dormant until the 90th reboot. At such time, it would begin to hide directories and rename them. Now, the ransom here was labeled a licensing fee, and it was in the sum of roughly $189 or $378. Now, we didn't have a lot of technology then like we do today, so the person requested that they send a cashier's check or a money order to a P.O. box in Panama. Now, this didn't last long, and this guy was actually booked and charged in the United Kingdom and was extradited to the United States. Now, interestingly enough, he tried to claim that the money would be donated to the AIDS research, and really it wasn't, and that wasn't his plan. So as we look at that, we had a number of other things happen, and then we find ourselves in roughly 2008. And this is when Bitcoin started to become a thing. Anonymous, secure, instant, not regulated, super perfect for extortion. Now, we say all this because this starts to lead into the payment of choice after that, and really in present day. So we have this one, which we've seen in roughly 2012. It exploits a vulnerability in the browser, largely targeted folks who were looking at adult sites, and it redirected them to like a beef server of sorts. The payment was roughly $300. They wanted it in the prepaid card. The tactics, right? Trying to intimidate people. So they would be presented with a screenshot, kind of like what we see on the right here, FBI crime division, right? Just trying to insinuate fear in people. Now, after it was done with everything it did, it would try to harvest passwords, right? This was post-payment. So it was bad enough that it will lock you out of your system, prevent you from accessing this stuff, and that you paid a fee. But following that, it would then try to steal passwords. Now, this one was easily removable because we could boot it to safe mode and remove a registry key and be good to go. So essentially, it was just presenting a window which prevented us from accessing our actual machine of sorts. Now, if that screenshot isn't enough for you, it also had another one where it tried to act as if it was part of the National Security Agency. Again, in everything it could to instill fear in the people whose system it was being run on. Then we had Cryptolocker, right? This was first seen somewhere around 2013. It typically used email as a vector. It began to do encrypting of files. This was kind of the first time we started seeing this tactic truly being done. It was about 70 types that it looked to do, and it used asymmetric encryption. So we had a private key, we had a public key of sorts. Now, it also utilized DGA, domain generated algorithm, where it had a subset of domains that weren't registered, but then at certain times, those domains would get registered, and then as it would go down this list of domains to try to contact, it would get to one that's finally registered, and then it would try to communicate with that system as a C2. At the time, it infected over 250,000 machines, and this was really a big deal when we think about the time in which this was happening. Now, it also propagated over the Game Over Zeus botnet, but in 2014, this was taken down, and the keys were recovered from the C2 server and given to those who were still who fell victim to it. Then we had Torrent Locker, somewhere around 2014, and this was mainly seen overseas, Australia, New Zealand area. Primarily spread through email. It also encrypted, but what it looked to do was harvest email addresses on the system as a method to then turn around and send emails to other people within your contact list to be able to propagate itself. It also sought to delete volume shadow copies. So that's something inherent to Windows, where they would take essentially snapshots of the volume and files of sorts. The ransom was somewhere around $500 in Bitcoin. And then guess what? Every receiver differs for each victim. So there was multiple different variations of this. We had Tesla Crypt somewhere around 2015. And what was interesting about this is the first one that actually also targeted gaming systems or data, right? It also utilized email and vulnerable servers as vectors. This one was somewhere around 185 file extensions that it would try to seek to encrypt. The gaming data that it would look for is about 40 extensions. And then the ransom was somewhere around $550 in Bitcoin. So if you found yourself as one of these diehard gamers using PC as a gaming platform, Tesla Crypt would also look to target you to go after that data. Imagine a person who's near the end of World of Warcraft, and now their system gets encrypted. That becomes data that is so valuable maybe to the person who owns it that they may pay this ransom because they want it back. So this ransomware looked to take advantage of that. In 2016, though, this was decommissioned, and it was so abrupt, right? The developers just stopped propagating it. They switched to other efforts. The decryption key was released, so it became something readily accessible to those who fell victim to it. 2016, we seen Locky. Locky really focused on Microsoft Office products. Now, this was interesting because when we look at the screenshot there, we clearly see that macros have been disabled, right? And we see the option there that we can check to re-enable them. But within the document in red, we see enable macro if the data encoding is incorrect. Well, the authors of this purposely typed that in so no matter what, it would look jarbled up, which then would have people enable macros thinking that they were actually fixing the problem. And instead what they were doing were infecting themselves. Now, this document distributed via botnet had over 5 million active devices, right? What's interesting is that this is one piece of ransomware, like many others, that doesn't affect certain language packs, right? So trying to stay away from geographic areas and or certain dialects and languages that people speak. Now, again, this was interesting because the macros is already disabled. The machine is trying to get you to enable it for the sake of infecting your machine. And largely how this whole scheme of maneuver, if you will, worked is the attacker would send an email, the user would open the email and the attachment, the user would enable the macros, right? The system would already be protecting you because it would have macros disabled, likely. And then you would be infecting yourself by enabling macros. A binary is downloaded and executed, your backups are deleted and files are encrypted, right? And then we see the ransom note that's presented to you when this happens. Petya, seen in 2016, rewrote over the master boot record. It then blue screened you, forcing you to restart. A fake check disk would then run, and at that time it would seek to encrypt the master file table. This would block access to the entire machine, not just your files. So this was kind of interesting because you had the same effect of encrypting specific files as you would with just denying access to the whole drive. This was given a ransom of roughly $300 or so. And what's interesting when we look at the chart there is overwhelmingly one country that was infected more than some of the other ones. So we might seek to think that this was a targeted type of attack, or maybe not. So also from that, we had WannaCry. So this was shortly after in 2017, affected over 300,000 machines in roughly 150 countries. And this propagated via an SMB exploit, 17010 to be exact, right? Caused over $1 billion in damages, primarily focused with Windows 7. And we see the ransom. Now, what's interesting is you had like an introductory rate when it came to the ransom, because days after that, that fee would go up. Right, it would almost double. It also threatened to delete your data if your payment wasn't received within a week. And what was really significant about this, and really how it died off somewhat quickly, was a reverse engineer was able to find the kill switch domain in the code. And he went out there and registered that domain, right? It was the biggest outbreak in history, but it could have been a lot worse if it wasn't for that. And this breakdown is as such, right? It arrives via an exploit, again, 17010. The file delivered via exploit, it runs as a service, drops the malware, and then it encrypts the local and shared file, somewhere around 176 file extensions. You'll know kind of clearly what you've been hit with, because the extension will be .WannaCry, right, for WannaCry. Then we have Maze, right? First seen in 2019, delivery through spam email, exploit kits, and then here fair recently, it was delivered through post-compromise, right? So post-exploitation, if you will. They also have the capability to encrypt via a virtual machine. So instead of this payload running directly on a system, it would deploy a virtual machine somewhere to the tune of like 1.5, 1.9 gigs in virtual box. And then it would have access to the host machine and then encrypt like that as a method of bypassing measures and going undetected. Now, it nearly targeted every industry of sorts. And we can kind of see that with the chart off to the right. Or not necessarily the chart off to the right. That's going to speak more to the countries that were affected by this ransomware. But more interesting than not, the actors maintain a public-facing website as a method to further embarrass, if you will, companies. So they will post stolen data from victims that refuse to pay. So you're either going to pay, and we're going to give you the decryption key, and you're going to get your data back, possibly, or you're not going to pay, and we're going to post your data online. That is ruthless. And we still see Maze being used today. Now, I'll stop here for a minute, all right, and we'll address the definition of pandemic, all right, because to this point, we've talked a little bit about the significance of ransomware. We've talked about history of it. Now, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of variants of ransomware. We only talked about 8 or so of them. But really, with this talk being talking about ransomware in a pandemic, well, what are we talking about here? Looking at the definition, pandemic, adjective. Prevalent throughout an entire country, continent, or the whole world. So when we look at what ransomware is hitting, it isn't specific to a state in the United States. It isn't specific to the United States as a whole. It is something that the entire world is dealing with. And it's only going to progressively get worse, as it has really over the last 5 years. So some numbers from the FBI. 2015, 8,000 complaints. Reported loss of 275 million. 2017, 301,000 complaints. 1.4 billion. Just last year, 467,000, 3.5 billion. It's just going to keep getting worse. Now, here's some statistics from 2019. 50% of surveyed 582 cyber professionals don't believe their organizations are prepared to even deal with the ransomware attack. That's scary. That's also interesting. Average cost of ransomware attack on businesses was $133,000. Phishing emails, as we've articulated, is an initial vector, increased by 109% from 2017. Now, of all the malware attacks, ransomware is behind 56% of them. 99% of ransoms were paid in Bitcoin. We've already articulated why that is the case. Now, if this is from 2019, this year is only going to get worse. It has been worse. The pandemic on coronavirus and everything else happening hasn't had people just stop trying to do ransomware attacks. It's actually increased, right? So here's some more staggering statistics. The average incident lasts 9.6 days. The decryptor supplied 96% of the time after payment. Let's digest that for a minute. So somebody could get hit with ransomware. They could pay the ransom, and 96% of the time, they would even get the decryptor. Wow. Imagine that. Data successfully recovered 93% of the time with the decryptor. Even worse. So I don't have a 100% chance of getting the decryptor after payment. But even if I get it, there's a 93% chance that it will actually work. Now, those are high numbers, but what if you're in that 4% or in that 7%? That's got to hurt. Now, a new organization fell victim every 14 seconds in 2019. It was projected that by 2021, 11 seconds of sorts. Let's look at some of the United States industries that are affected, right? We got roughly 966 organizations that we'll use here. Of those, 11.7 were state and municipal governments and agencies. 79% were healthcare providers, right? Which would kind of make sense. You hit them the hardest because they may have the biggest or the largest amount to lose. Now, some of the outcomes. Emergency patients had to be redirected to other hospitals. Wow. Medical records were inaccessible and in some cases permanently lost. 911 services were interrupted. Surveillance systems went offline. Jail doors could not be remotely opened. Schools could not access data about students' medication or allergies. I would tell you, and you already know this, ransomware authors are ruthless. They only see money. So here's some state governments that were affected. City of Atlanta, March 2018. The ransom, $52,000. They didn't pay it. They did not want to set the precedents that they would conceive to such behavior. Instead, the recovery cost them roughly or over $17 million, right? Jackson County, Georgia, ransom $400,000, they paid it. Had an effect on the law enforcement database and control. City of Baltimore, $75,000. They did not pay it. The recovery cost $18 million, right? They added an insurance plan to cover $20 million. Riviera Beach, Florida, $600,000. They paid it. The attack shut down city websites, email server, billing system. They ended up investing $900,000 into new hardware to rebuild the IT infrastructures. Although they paid it, they still had other issues. And now they call themselves posturing themselves for the next time. Lake City, Florida, $460,000. They paid it. Email system 911 dispatches affected. New Bedford, Massachusetts, $5.3 million. $5.3 million. They did not pay it. They actually attempted to negotiate here, but that didn't work out. There was 158 workstations that were affected. That turned into roughly 4% of the city's computers, if you will. Now, when we look at private sector, healthcare, education, we have stuff like the Wood Ranch Medical Facility. The ransom amount was unknown. Over 5,800 records inaccessible. Backup server was encrypted. Organization ended up going out of business. Campbell County Health. Unknown ransom. Don't even know if they paid it. Surgeries were canceled. ER patients were transferred. they were forced to stop accepting new inpatient admissions, right? The Heritage Group, ransom amount unknown. After 60 years of business, they ended up having to close their doors. 300 employees left without a job just before Christmas. Let's look at the school system. Louisiana public schools. Several public schools hit, affected 10% of the 5,000 servers and over 1,500 computers. We got the Rockville School District, ransom 176,000. They negotiated to 88,000. The insurance cost about 10,000 in deductible, right? But again, these things that are being hit are key infrastructure, key items that take a toll on our daily lives. You know, our government, the healthcare, schools. Again, ransomware authors are ruthless. It's just going to keep getting worse. Now, there's a group of people who are looking at this and are like, man, this is horrible. I want to help. I want to do something about it. Awesome. There's also another group of people that's like, man, that's awesome. I wish I had the skills and ability to really do this. And it's kind of sad, but if you're the latter group of folks, there's something for you. There's ransomware for the less skilled. So there's open source ransomware, and then there's ransomware as a service, right? So when we look at stuff like Stampedo, lifetime access costs you $39. Philadelphia, $380 for unlimited license, and they even have a YouTube video, right? We have stuff like Satan. You can customize your ransomware. Pick your amount, add your Bitcoin address, what have you. The sky's the limit. Now, the authors of this are going to keep 30%. And then here's a close-up of our configurations of what we can do. So as somebody who's not skilled in this, I can keep 70% of my profits, and I'm paying 30% to the makers of this service that I'm going to be utilizing. Now, some may feel, hey, you know what? Ransomware is dangerous, not really a thing I'm concerned about because I don't use Windows, so I'm safe. Well, that's false, right? And what we see here is that there's a ransomware for nearly every variant, right? So we see some Linux, Mac OS, iOS, we see Android. So Mac OS, Patcher, somewhere around 2017, disguised itself as a patch for applications like Microsoft Office, Adobe Pro, things that you probably would get off a torrent site and want to get for free. So this patch would essentially be patching the software so you could have access as if you paid for it. But instead, it would be holding your system for ransom. Ransom was roughly $300. We have Key Ranger, right? It essentially utilized the transmission application. And this is nothing more than like a BitTorrent for Mac OS. So they had compromised it, and on the version of transmission on the site, the official site with the developer signed certificate, when you downloaded and installed it, it would hold your system for ransom of sorts. So again, taking over a legitimate binary from a legitimate site with a developer certificate, download, install, your system wouldn't think anything about it because it has a legitimate certificate from a trusted entity, and that's how it was getting around things. So if you're now terrified because of ransomware as a whole, understanding that there's different operating systems and variants as far as systems it can go after, and you know, you're like, wow, okay, well what's next? Here's some more for you. Ransomware of the future, right? The Internet of Things. So when we look in the picture, we got stuff like microwaves, you know, vacuum cleaners, thermostats, cameras, all these things that are connected. You know, there's a reason why we don't see security in like Internet of Things, because one would argue that they're not secure. But they have so much access and they become so much a part of our lives that we could envision that this would be the next wave of things. And when I say the future of ransomware, I mean the now of ransomware. So there was a pen tester at DEF CON 24 that successfully compromised the connected thermostat. They locked out the device until the ransom was paid. they have the ability to change the temperature on the device. Wow. If that's not enough for you, let's check this out. So we had an LG TV that is running Android OS, and it was hit with ransomware. This ransomware would pretend to come from the FBI. The ransom would charge you $500 in ransom, but LG would charge you $340. Okay, $340 for LG to help me, $500 for the ransom. In the end, LG just provided the reset steps because they didn't want to lose customers and everything else. But your TV is hit with ransomware. Wow, the future is now, right? And if that's not scary enough, let's look at the breakdown of Internet of Things by the year 2025. We see business and manufacturing leading the way, essentially with approximately 40%, transportation with 4.1%. This is only going to increase. Technology is a great thing for the user, but it's also a great thing for ransomware authors and really criminals at large. So if now you're not feeling safe, right, because ransomware is literally everywhere, right, and you're trying to tell yourself you'll be okay, I think not, right? So let me now help you. Let's talk about the 5 stages of ransomware grief. The first one, denial, right? What do you mean we got hit with ransomware? You're joking, right? Nobody will find out about this. We can keep it under wraps. You're in denial that it actually happened. And then you get to the point where you're just angry. You're telling me this wormed its way into every system, including the backups, right? You went from denial to anger about it. Then you kind of start bargaining. Can the FBI help with this? Please, God, help us get our data back, right? Because you become almost desperate a little bit. Then you fall into depression. Oh, this is probably the end of my career. Our share price is down 30%. And then the last one, you just become accepting of it, right? Let's go ahead and pay them. We all follow these stages of grief in a number of things in our life, but they ring true when it comes to ransomware. Now, here's the mitigation techniques, or some. We call this the playbook. This is going to sound cliche. You probably have heard this before, but it's the simple things that work. Take backups. Test the backups. Store them offline. Do not store them on the same network in which your data is traditionally flowing. Because if it gets infected, they're just going to move laterally to affect your backups. Again, they're going to try to get rid of those backups because they don't want you to be able to revert back to them so quickly. Don't click on links, attachments, anything unknown, unexpected in emails, right? You want to implement filters. You want to educate users. You want to do it regularly, and you want to do it very often. You want to utilize some type of security software that gives multi-layered protection. Employ application whitelisting if you can. That way you can explicitly say these binaries can execute nothing more, nothing less. Where applicable, where possible, employ least privilege. That way we don't have things like privilege creep or people being able to do more than what they should. You want to make sure you enforce unique and strong passwords. Don't allow them to be reused, and you want to rotate those frequently. And last but not least, we want to make sure we keep our operating system up to date. Make sure we're updating from trusted resources, validate hashes where applicable. Now, here's some other mitigations and techniques that we can use from the perspective of resources online. Know before. It has the ability to install a ransomware simulator on your machine. It doesn't encrypt anything, but it tests for 16 types of scenarios. This works with Windows 7 and newer. If we look at the screenshot here, it will go through your system and identify files that it could encrypt if it was actually ransomware. Gives you an idea of the state in which you reside in, whether your intrusion detection system detected it or nothing was detected of sorts. So giving you a glimpse into that. We also have No More Ransom. This assists with identification of it. So you're likely always going to have your files encrypted. There's probably going to be some ransom note, but if you have no idea what's what, you can take aspects of those things and be able to upload them to No More Ransom, and it will help you identify it. There's also about 123 decryptors on there that will help you decrypt your ransomware if you've been hit. ID ransomware, same thing, helps you with identification of the ransomware that has hit you. Roughly over 800 ransomware variants on there, so you can quickly identify the ransom that's hit your system. Now, we've all seen this pyramid of pain, right? How do we get after this pandemic, right? Because it's not going anywhere. Well, again, at the bottom, the larger, the easier it is, right? We want to get to the top of that pyramid of pain to really affect ransomware and really the tactics that people use, right? Well, how could we do that? Well, we can start to nest really that cycle, if you will, use MITRE or whatever you feel most comfortable with to really map out some of the things that ransomware authors do. We'll see in some cases they utilize the same TTPs. In other cases, it may slightly vary. So as we look at this example, initial access, we have Maze ransomware, and then we also have Robinhood using RDP brute force. Okay, do I have anything on RDP accessible where somebody could take advantage of this, right? Same thing with credential theft, lateral movement persistent, right? If you're lucky enough, you'll see stuff like Mimikatz being used, and you can be able to not only identify it, but stop it. And then you'd be able to say what stage in the campaign somebody is at. By the time they get to the payload part, it's already too late, because that's the point where they're doing the payload of the ransomware. But if we could identify it early on, we may be able to stop it. And this is where this cybersecurity programs with multi-layer defense come into play. So as we round this out and really sum everything up here, why should you pay? Well, FBI has previously stated easiest path is to pay, but you'll get your files back. And I put there maybe because we've already articulated that there's cases in which those decryptors don't work, right? It might be cheaper in the long run, as articulated with Atlanta and a number of other cases. Now, conversely, why should you not pay? Well, the US CERT and FBI clearly say no, which contradicts the previous one. I recognize that. It seems cheaper, but it's really not, because you'll have to do some form of disclosure, and that's not cheap, right? You're probably going to lose some stock there, probably going to lose some customers. There's also a target on your back. If you pay once, you'll probably pay again, whether it's the same people coming back at you or somebody else now trying to target you. And again, there's no guarantee you'll get your files back. And when we do this, the criminals, they win. All right, so what to do if you've been hit with ransomware? Contact the cybersecurity specialist. Research the variant on your own. Check out some of those sites I mentioned and a number of other things online. You may be able to kind of service yourself, if you will. Take the machine offline. Make sure you change all passwords and wait. Wait as long as you have to, right? It may feel like a knee-jerk reaction to hurry up and try to get your data back and pay or do whatever it takes, but you need an opportunity to really think it through, the best avenue. But lastly, if you take heed to things like, the passwords, the updates, making sure you're not downloading stuff from specific sites and the attack surface, reducing that, you may not find yourself in this position. I'll say this, 2020 has been a trying year for all of us. So many people are affected by the coronavirus in many, many ways. Ransomware is really no different. Whether we're affected with it firsthand, we're probably 2 to 3, if not 5 entities removed from it. There's no end in sight with ransomware, but each of us can do our part to limit its success. With that, I'll bring it to the end. This presentation will be on my website at that link. Any other programs and stuff that I make, you'll see on my GitHub. And if you want to keep in touch and just have like-minded conversations about anything cybersecurity related, you can find me on Twitter at Wired Pulse. With that, thanks for your time. I look forward to meeting each and every one of you one day. Thanks.